Hello and welcome to my channel, I Win to Lose Gaming. Today we're going to be doing something slightly different, and I'm going to be going through kind of a banner pull guide for you guys. And in particular, I'm going to be using some math as well as my personal advice in terms of recommending, hey, what should you go for each of these characters, in particular the featured characters, Kamisato Ayato, as well as the Raiden Shogun. So here are the two banners. We can see we have Raiden as well as the 4-star characters, Sai, Rosaria, as well as Sara. And we have Kamisato, Ayato, as well as the same 4-star characters. And finally, we have each of their signature weapons, the Harankapaku Futsu, the sword for Ayato, as well as the Engulfing Lightning, the pole arm for Raiden. So we're going to be doing things a little bit differently in this video, and we're going to be focusing a lot on some charts, and I'm also going to just be going through these charts on screen for you guys. And we're making a few assumptions in terms of the average pull data. Generally speaking, it's about 105 pulls for the 5-star character that you want. It's roughly 105 pulls factoring in epitomized path for the 5-star weapon that you want. Now, do keep in mind that in order to factor in the epitomized path, you actually do need to pull a lot. We're going to start with the Raiden Shogun, and this chart is actually pretty old. It's from my old Raiden videos. However, this chart is still completely applicable to the standard hyper carry Raiden team, which consists of Raiden, Bennett, Kazuha, as well as Kujo Sara. The baseline for this chart, the 100%, is once you factor in Constellation 0 Sara's buff to the Raiden Shogun, and I'm actually not sure what weapon she's using, but oh well, it's not too important for this chart. Let's talk a bit about what's going on in this chart, starting with Constellation 1. So Constellation 1, what it does is it pretty much provides you with more resolve for Raiden, which does increase her damage. Now do keep in mind that it is a bit situational, and this is mostly applicable in Abyss because at the beginning of an Abyss chamber, you will start off with 0 resolve unless you're in the second half and you grab a couple energy particles from the first half. But besides like some small variances like that and some small outliers like that, you can pretty much assume that you start off with 0 resolve. And therefore, if you start off with 0 resolve and you have Constellation 1, then you cycle through your support stuff, you will gain 16.72 resolve roughly, and then you will then gain a 12% damage to Raiden's elemental burst damage. And this column here, the PRIMOGEMS per percent, is the PRIMOGEMS per spent in order to get a 1% gain in your Raiden Shogun's damage. So in this case, it is roughly 1400 PRIMOGEMS per percentage point of power that you gain, which is not really good. And in other words, you want this to be the less PRIMOGEMS spent per, power gain, the better. And yeah, I don't know why that was 470. Yeah, I think I copy pasted, but yeah. Constellation 2 is the big kahuna of the Raiden Shogun's kit, where she gives 60% defense shred, or ignore defense, sorry, it's very different from defense shred. Ignore defense with her elemental burst damage. You can see here that this provides a 43% gain in her damage, and in terms of the PRIMOGEMS per percentage gain, it is all the way down to just 392. This is one of the largest gains in damage from a single constellation in the entire game, and it's also why I've also given this a 5 slime out of 5 slime rating. Now, the total PRIMOGEMS spent is also just a column that you guys can see roughly how many PRIMOGEMS it takes to bring Raiden up to this point in power. So the next thing to consider is her Constellation 3, which adds 3 talent levels to her elemental burst. First of all, this gives 18% in comparison to the 12% from her Constellation 1. That's why I've rated it higher. On top of that, this is much less situational. Constellation 1, I forgot to talk about why it's situational. In the overworld, for example, you're going to have random particles from here or there, and let's say you cycle through your full team's elemental bursts, then you're, even at Constellation 0, there's going to be a lot of situations where you actually do have maximum resolve on your Raiden, even if you don't have your Constellation 1. So the next thing is that Constellation 6 Sara adds another 27% damage on top of all of this. But by Constellation 3 Raiden, there is a very good chance that you do have Constellation 6 Sara, and that she will be able to provide that massive buff to you. So I did not really factor in the PRIMOGEM percent cost for Constellation 6 Sara, because we're hoping and assuming that you get your Constellation 6 Sara by this point. Now the next thing is Raiden's signature weapon. the Refinement 1 Engulfing Lightning. Okay, so this is my order of essentially what I would invest into this character in order of importance for the biggest amount of damage gain. And in Raiden's case, we're going from Constellation 0 all the way up to Constellation 3 before I would personally start pulling for her signature weapon, which is the Engulfing Lightning. And there's a few reasons for this. One is that the catch is an amazing weapon, and for most players without insanely good crit ratios, the catch's passive crit rate is a huge asset for the Raiden Shogun, and that will actually provide significant damage gain because most of our crit ratios aren't perfect like the damage maximizer algorithm assumes. However, the Engulfing Lightning is the next biggest upgrade for the Raiden Shogun in terms of if you're trying to bump up her power past Constellation 3. Now, if you add, of course, more refinements to your Engulfing Lightning, she will gain more damage, roughly 7% more damage per refinement, but we can see here that this Primogems per percent gained is very poor, as it is with most refinements on 5-star weapons. You'll see that with the Kamisato Ayato as well in the next chart. This is mostly for whales, and for whales that are willing to invest that much, that many resources into this, it can be worth it to them. Now, the rest of her constellations, they don't increase her burst damage output, so I pretty much don't really consider these to be worth it at all. Of course, one thing that's notable is that her Constellation 6 in particular, it's good for mega whales like myself, because when you speedrun with Raiden, the bottleneck for your speedruns typically lies in your Kujo-Sara's 20-second cooldown, and by slashing just literally a couple times, you'll bring Kujo-Sara's cooldown down to 18 seconds, so when you retry a chamber, it is now an 18-second wait instead of a 20-second wait, therefore saving you, 2 seconds every single Abyss retry, which adds up a lot over time. However, that is for a person like me who has no life and does that over and over, right? So for the rest of you guys, it's Constellations 4 through 6. It's not going to be a good value for your Primogems. Let's next move on to Kamisato Ayato, and I guess I'll leave the elemental burst damage gain here, even though it's really not that important for him, and we're going to mostly focus on his E combo damage, which is his Namisen combo, where he's just, press E and slashes a whole bunch. Kamisato Ayato is interesting because he doesn't really have any spectacular free-to-play 4-star swords available for him, and because of that, that actually kind of leads to the Harangapaku being a massive upgrade for him in comparison to even his early constellations. As we can see, the Harangapaku with 2 stacks in comparison to a Refinement 1 Blackcliff Longsword with 0 stacks is a massive 46% gain to his Namisen slash damage. And also, as an added benefit, he also gains 23% damage on his Elemental Burst, which is very nice. But it is worth keeping in mind that if you do have some other swords for Kamisato Ayato, like for example the Jade Cutter, as well as even the Mist Splitters. Actually, why don't we go over to that weapon chart real quick? Here it is. Here is his weapon chart. So for example, if you have weapons like the Primordial Jade Cutter or even the Mist Splitters with 4, so there's a lot of great swords for Kamisato Ayato. Heck, even the Skyward Blade at Refinement 1's already at 83%, and the Black Sword is between 77 and 85% depending on how many refinements you have on this thing. That's the thing, is that if you do not have pretty much the Black Sword or any of these swords above the Black Sword, the Harangapaku is going to be the biggest damage gain you can gain for your Kamisato Ayato for the average Primogem spent. However, that brings us to the problem of the weapon banner. If you are risk averse or you do not have 210 pulls essentially to guarantee you the Harangapaku with the epitomized path, it is something that I would strongly consider avoiding, because you can get some guaranteed damage gains through his constellations instead. So that is a decision for you to make and not for me to tell you. That's based on your risk aversion as well as how willing you are to kind of take that risk. So me personally, I think the damage gain is worth the risk if you're stuck with a weapon like the Blackcliff Longsword. So with all of that out of the way, let's move on to his actual constellations. As we can see, the Primogems per percent, even for his Constellation 1, which is plus 40% bonus damage against an an enemy with less than 50% HP with a weapon like the Harangapaku. This is only an average of a 9% gain for Kamisato Ayato, which is not good at all. However, it will provide more gains on a weapon like, for example, the Jade Cutter. It will provide more gains on a weapon like the Blackwood Longsword, so on and so forth. So it is a bit more higher value for weapons that do not provide bonus damage. Now the next thing is the 5 max Namisen stacks as well as the plus 50% HP. This one provides a bit more of a substantial gain at about 16% additional damage for Kamisato Ayato. However, the problem with this is that it just provides flat damage instead of, for example, scaling better with something like more attack on Kamisato Ayato, like from Bennett's Burst or something like that. But you know, it's still a very solid constellation for Kamisato Ayato. But we can see here that we're missing those crazy boosts in power like the Constellation 2 for the Raiden Shogun. The next constellation is Constellation 3, where we are adding 3 levels to his elemental skill. His Constellation 3 is pretty good as well, just providing a very solid 16% additional damage to his Namisen slashes roughly. Now next up is his Constellation 4, which provides 15% attack speed, and this is into an entirely different multiplier effectively. It's its own thing that just increases overall damage without diminishing returns from other stuff unless you have attack speed from other sources. Kamisato Ayato is often a character that you don't actually use his elemental burst, especially if you have more constellations on him. You know, using his elemental burst is often not worth the time. However, at Constellation 4 and below, I do think it is worth using his elemental burst, and therefore, you know, for this sake of you know, him being a Constellation 4 or lower, it's still a pretty decent constellation. The next constellation is his Constellation 5, which increases his burst damage by 18%. Most of Ayato's damage does not come from his elemental burst. Not a great constellation. I don't recommend targeting this constellation unless you are planning to go for his Constellation 6. Now, Ayato's Constellation 6 counts as normal attack damage, and it front loads just a raw 900% attack scaling multiplier, which is extremely powerful for Kamisato Ayato. Now, fun fact, this constellation was nerfed actually by MiHoYo when they fixed his, I guess, buggy E-duration problem, which I made an entire video on it. But after they fixed that, you can't actually slash the Constellation 6 first for a big vape, which is pretty unfortunate. But yeah, that's a story for another day. But anyway, it is still an incredible constellation, and I do recommend it if, for example, you know, you've already gone to Constellation 4. I mean, yeah, it's a good constellation if you're playing to Constellation 6, a character like Ayato. Front loading that much damage is just always a good thing. Now, the last upgrade for Kamisato Ayato is the Harangapaku, which you can get to Refinement 5. It's expensive for the gain. We can see here, this math actually doesn't look all that correct. I think, there we go. Yeah, I had it multiplying this column instead of this column. So yeah. Anyway, as we can see, the PRIMOGEMS per power spent on refinements for the Harangapaku is pretty poor. So let's talk about a few more things about these banners. Now, Sayu is a character who I will always promote. She has never left my overworld team since her release. And like, okay, well, she's left it a couple times for, you know, video showcases. But when I'm just exploring the overworld, Sayu is always in my team. She is a great ore farmer. She is a healer. And finally, she is a great form of mobility, and she is Animo, providing you with Animo resonance. She's literally everything you want in an overworld character, and crystal flies don't run away from you. So these things all make Sayu literally one of the most valuable characters, in my opinion, from a quality of life perspective for anyone's account. Now, for a character like Kamisato Ayato, unfortunately, outside of Sayu, neither Rosaria or Sara are characters that I strongly recommend. Rosaria is a character who can benefit Ayato with her crit rate buff, as well as if you decide to play him in a free situation. However, you know, it's okay. It's okay. You can use him with Rosaria, but yeah. Now for Raiden, obviously, if you're going for constellations on Raiden, you're also gonna get Constellation on Sara, which is going to be a huge help to your account. Let's talk about the weapon banner. The Harangapaku is a pretty good generalized sword for, you know, characters, obviously. And if we take a look at it, we can see that at Refinement 1 it provides 12% all elemental damage, and the rest of the buffs only provide normal attack up to 40% normal attack damage, which is unfortunately not really applicable to any other sword characters. No other sword characters in the game off the top of my head really use their normal attacks, so do keep that in mind. However, it's still a great stat stick, tons of crit rate, reasonable base attack, and finally 12% all elemental damage. But do keep in mind that, for example, let's say you're pulling for the Engulfing Lightning and you get the Harangapaku, unfortunately. Now, the Harangapaku is while it is a good general sword weapon, it is also not, it's pretty much power crept by the Jade Cutter in terms of being a generalized sword, because the Jade Cutter will do better than a Refinement 1 Harangapaku on pretty much anyone besides Kamisato Ayato. However, for Kamisato Ayato, as we saw in that chart, the Harangapaku is by far and away the best option. Let's say you're pulling for the Harangapaku and you get the Engulfing Lightning. You should know this weapon pretty well, but it is an incredible weapon on Xiangling. And Xiangling is an amazing teammate for Ayato as well. So let's say you don't end up getting the Harangapaku for Ayato and instead you get the Engulfing Lightning. You can always throw the Engulfing Lightning on Xiangling and then run a Boba national team, which will do incredibly well thanks to the power gain that Xiangling will get from the Engulfing Lightning. Of course, the Engulfing Lightning is great on Rosaria as well. It's great on Raiden. It's great on most Polearm characters that want to do damage because, you know, it scales really well off of energy recharge and burst damage. So yeah, let me know what you thought about this video, kind of a poll guide in terms of constellations and order of priority that I would personally go for if I were pulling for these characters. Again, let me know if you found this guide helpful. Maybe I will do more like this in the future. Let me know who you plan to pull for in this weapon banner or if you are planning to skip. As always, I appreciate every single one of you. This is I Want to Lose, signing out.